Welcome to this webinar on enhancing thinking through parenting, and we are extremely sorry that we are a full 20 minutes late. There was a technical glitch, and thank you all very much for bearing with us and for your time to be with us today. I'm Sriram, and my fellow panelists today are Vaidishwaran, we call him Dish, and Shireen. Over the next hour or so, we hope to deliver something that might be of value to you on parenting. We believe this is an important topic, enhancing thinking through parenting. However, we also think that it doesn't get the kind of attention it deserves in the normal parenting discourse. At the end of the webinar, if some of you have got the hint of what the think approach is towards enhancing thinking abilities, we will have done our job. Now, who are we? We are parents with a keen interest in education. As our children were growing up, we felt that we could use the time we spent with them in sharpening their thinking abilities. However, that had to be done, we had no option, that had to be done in an ad hoc or an unstructured way. When we stumbled into Think, a collective of individuals keen on education and thinking abilities, we identified with their pursuits and we joined them. And given the benefits that our children have derived, and also the children of those who tapped us for advice from time to time, we thought we felt compelled to share our thoughts with a larger audience of parents, and therefore we are here in this webinar. Before we begin, a few disclaimers. What we are not psychologists, we are not counselors, we are not experts on emotional aspects of parenting, which are also very important. We are not here to preach to you anything on parenting. Our objective is to share some thoughts mostly arising out of our experience with children. And we all know that each child is different. There is no one blanket solution for all the troubles and all the challenges that we have in parenting. This webinar is intended to trigger some thoughts in you rather than provide accurate solutions to your specific challenges. And if you are looking for assistance in the context of special needs children, we request you to write to us separately. We may be able to guide you to experts or sources for further guidance. All right, with that introduction out of the way, I will delve into the topic, enhancing thinking through parenting. I would set the ball rolling and then hand it over to my fellow panelists, Dish and Shireen. And after we have all spoken, we will take up your questions and respond to as many as we can in the time available. All right. So there are two aspects of thinking abilities which I want to briefly touch upon in sort of my allocated time. One is about questioning. We all know that children ask fascinating questions. It comes naturally to them, and usually respond with answers which are either we know the answers, in which case we give them the answers, or if we do not know the answers, we find the very easiest access possible to the answer, which could be a Google or rarely now a book or a YouTube video or some such thing. So when answers and access to answers are so easily available, what is the need for, is that sufficient? Is there a need for anything more than that? Now, well, to get answers from credible sources is a skill to cultivate, all right. However, that doesn't help us beyond a point. There will be situations in their lives, there are situations in our lives when we need to depend on our thinking rather than our access to external source for answers. For example, how will you evaluate a lawyer's advice on a particular issue which is important to you, what will you go by? What will you give up if you have two things which are very dear to you, very close to you, and you want to give up neither? But if you are forced to give up one of them, what will you give up and what will you keep? If you are running short on cash, as a lot of people are right now in a lockdown condition, what will be your priorities on spending? What will you buy and not buy? This is a slightly connected question to our times. Given that we are in an unprecedented situation, there is no model for us to draw lessons from the past to tackle what we are facing now. What will guide your actions? How will you deal with situations emerging on economy and in the health domain? So responses to these questions need a person to reflect on these questions very well, think through them, and examine alternatives, and look at pros and cons very closely before arriving at inferences. So this is vastly different from gaining access to a correct answer. So if children get trained in gaining access to correct answer, all that we just spoke about are not connected to that or not relevant. So what do we do with children? When children ask questions, we may have to think in terms of responses like, even if you know the answer, can we say something like, okay, what do you think is the answer? What could it be? Or what do you think we should do? Or supposing there is an answer, can we guess the answer? And before then we can check if the answer is correct. And what will your guess be based on? What kind of reasoning will you have for guessing the answer? All this, it can be an interesting kind of a game. The point is not to answer, but to engage with the child's question. They are two different things. And these will probably help the child to possibly figure out the answers themselves for many questions. Conversely, if you are asking questions to your child instead of the child asking questions to you, you might want to ask open-ended questions. Like, if you have so much money, what will you do? What do you think? Supposing you want to shift the capital from Delhi to some other location, what should be the location for a new capital? And what will be the guiding factors for you in locating that new capital? All right, so I will move on to the next part, which is knowing. We dealt with questioning. Now it's a bit about knowing. What does it mean to really know something? We want our children to gather knowledge, gain as much of it as possible. The more, the better. That's the common opinion. What does it really mean to know something? You might be familiar with I want to just tell you a story. We might be familiar with the name of Richard Feynman, a famous Nobel laureate, physics Nobel laureate, and a famous author and a very charming kind of a professor. Now, when Feynman was very young, when he was a child, his father and Feynman went for a walk and they spotted a bird. Feynman asked his father, what is the name of this bird? So Feynman's father told him that this is a brown-throated thrush in English. It's called Halsenvogel in German. It is called Chungling in Chinese. It is called Palpu Nira Paravai in Tamil. Say whatever you want, okay? Even if you know the name of the bird in all the languages of the world, you still do not know anything about the bird. Now, what does it mean to know something about the bird? The bird actually teaches its young how to fly. The bird travels thousands of miles in winter and comes back to the same location in summer. And the bird sings. The tunes are very interesting. It is a thrush. All the thrush birds sing. So if you have figured any of this, if you know these things about the bird, what all it does, and if you can discover how it exactly comes back to its location, then you can say that you know something about the bird. Knowing the name of the bird is irrelevant, right? This lesson stayed with Feynman for a very long time. So knowing the name of something is very different from knowing the concept behind that word. So we get children to use words like terms like energy or democracy often, and we think they have understood the concepts. Now, it may be worth examining whether they have actually understood the concepts or they are just going by the words. There is another thing to knowing, another aspect to knowing, is that when we say we know something, we usually mean that some kind of an accepted wisdom. A textbook or a teacher has told us that this is truth and we have accepted it. We have accepted that assertion. And we think that is true and we think that is knowledge. Is that our knowledge? For instance, children, they experience sun rising in the east and setting in the west every day without a single day exception. But what is the textbook telling us? The textbook tells the children that it is the earth which goes around the sun and it is not the sun which goes around the earth. And that's what the teacher says too. So the children disregard their own experience and accept this assertion to be true. Now, has it become their knowledge? Perhaps not. There is an interesting way to get children to hold this and examine if it is true. If the children are on that path, then they will probably come to know and make it their own knowledge. So simply accepting assertions, even if they are true, by and large, of others, could be authorities, textbooks, teachers, whoever, or parents, is not knowledge. For this, children need to do a bunch of things like questioning, reasoning, critically evaluating evidence, and arriving at conclusions. All this is part of a bundle called learning for them. So with those thoughts, I hand it over to Deesh. Deesh.
Thanks, Sriram. Thanks, Sriram. Sriram spoke about questioning, knowing, and learning, and how all of this, in a certain sense, is linked with thinking. What I'm going to do is to relate 3 stories. Given that the parents who have signed up for this webinar could be parents of primary schoolers, parents of middle schoolers, or high schoolers, I have picked 3 different stories which might appeal to each of the different categories of parents that we are likely to have. Shireen, can I request you to put the picture on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, some of you may recognize the picture. The picture is essentially taken from the poster that we have. The poster is something that you can relate with, but I'd urge you to imagine that you are walking with your child. You're walking in nature, be it in the forest, or be it along a beach, or in a boat, or you're on a boat within the vast expanse of the sea or an ocean, or you're high in the mountains. It's just you and your child and the nature around you. The child and you are soaking the environment. They are absorbing it all. Hearing the sounds of nature, seeing the light, playing hide and seek with the branches, with the leaves. You feel the touch of your child, and the child feels the touch of you. The scent of nature passing through the air. You stick your tongue out and see whether you taste anything. There is silence all around. It is you, your child, nature, and silence. Now assume that you are on an evening walk in the woods, and the sun sets and the moon shines through. Your child notices it. There is a pause. The child asks, "What is that?" You say, "It's the moon." Then the child asks, "Why is it called the moon?" You say, "Just like you have a name, I have a name, that object has a name. It's the moon." Then the child asks, suppose the child asks, "Why does the moon walk with me?" And here is how you can possibly take the conversation forward. Does it do so in every direction? Let's walk 100 meters north and see where the moon is. Let's walk 100 meters south and see where the moon is. Does this happen to the lamppost? How does a distant tree or a mountain look like? Is it possible for the star also to walk with you? But why not the poor lamppost? Guide the child to discover the relation between the distance between the child and the object he's seeing or she's seeing. It might be a bit hazy in the beginning, but that's perfectly fine. It's okay not to explain. Suppose the child asks, is the moon bigger than the stars? Now, don't be tempted to respond with a yes or a no, even if you are in a hurry to leave somewhere. That would kill an excellent learning opportunity for the child. Instead, begin with questions such as, which is bigger? That building far away or the window through which we see it? Shall we check if it is the moon that goes over the stars or the other way around? What would you conclude in either case? That would at least clarify if the moon is nearer or the stars are nearer. Again, the child will begin seeing connections between the size of the objects and the distance. But you as a parent shouldn't be in a hurry to explain. The struggle to make the connections is far more valuable than getting to know them by being told by someone. So that ends my story. Now let me just examine the story for you. I related the story, I call this the story of experience, to illustrate developing thinking abilities requires an appreciation of different worlds. The world of nature, the world of information that uses labels. Now, before you cast the label, the moon, it was you, the child, the nature, and perhaps the moon. There were no words in that. Now you move from the world of nature to the world of information that uses labels. And then there's the world of knowledge that aims to understand these labels and how they are interconnected and seeks an explanation. And in the world of knowledge, you can see that there is an approach to facilitate an understanding or facilitate the creation of knowledge in the child. Thinking abilities is not a mechanical application of some tools, which is often made out to be, but that's clearly not the approach that Think has and would recommend for you to consider. Remembering the different worlds that each of us live within as its value, an important thinking value. Many of us are stuck in particular worlds, be it in the world of knowledge, or to be even more specific, the world of bioinformatics, or the world of molecular biology, or the world of money. There are other worlds that exist around us. As I, in this case, divided the world into three, you could divide it into many more. But what you and your child need to recognize is that we need to live in all the worlds. The earlier we get to do this with the child, the better it is. Now, even today, when you walk out with your child, pause for a moment if you're in a natural environment. Let not the labels of what a tree is, what a leaf is, what kind of a tree is come in. Live in the world of nature silently, observing it before the world of information comes in. And then the world of knowledge will enter in and recognize that there are these three worlds which are constantly fighting for your mind space. But that recognition is particularly important in the context of developing thinking abilities. Moving on to my next story, I'm going to play a game. And I'd volunteer Shireen to play the game with me. This story is for a middle schooler. At the end of this story, I'm going to give you a clear game that you can take away and play it with your child after this webinar is over. Yeah, and I'll also give you some indications as to how best this game is to be played. This is a simple two-player game. It's a game of counting to 100, right? And if I just say counting to 100, I can say 1 and Shireen says 3, and there has to be some rules to the game, right? So the rule that I put onto the game is to say, if I say a number, then Shireen would have to give a number which add 1 to 10 to it. So to give you an example, if I say 2, she can say any number between 3 and 12, right? She can either add 1 or she can add 10. Now, what is the goal of the game? The goal of the game is to figure out who gets to the number 100 first. That's our target, right? In the way we count. Now, Shireen, would you like to start or do you want me to start?
You go ahead. I'll follow along.
Okay. So let me start with the number 7. Go ahead, Shireen.
10,
11.
15,
16.
24,
25.
29,
30.
38,
39.
47,
48,
56,
57,
66,
67,
73,
74,
85,
89,
92.
100. I win.
Ah.
Do you want to start this time and see whether you can pick me to the post?
Yeah, okay.
Go ahead.
5,
10,
12,
20,
23,
30,
35,
40,
48,
50,
59,
60,
69,
70,
85,
89,
93.
100.
There's no way I can win this one, can I?
Yeah. Yeah, this is well, the game was played to say that we play a game by the rules, and when it's a two-player game and it's a very clear target, the idea is to figure out what is the strategy to win the game. Now, some of you would have noticed in the first version of the game, I always counted a number over what Shireen said. And in the second game, I picked all the 0 numbers, right? Now, some of you may have started looking at that to see whether there is a strategy embedded in my approach. But I was actually trying to fool you. Yeah, there's another strategy, and some of you who have played this game before may have figured out that strategy. The strategy is, if you notice, in both the games that we played, I picked the 89. So the person who picks the number 89 always wins, right? And therefore, the person who picks 78 always wins. And therefore, the person who picks 67 always wins, right? If you look at going all the way, the person who picked up 12 will always win if both of them are playing the game, recognizing the strategy, and therefore it's always clear that the person who starts the game always wins, right? Now, this is something that a child needs to figure out on his or her own. And you as a parent should try to confuse the child and make it difficult for the child to figure out as to what is the rule or what is the strategy that he or she needs to adopt in order to win the game. Now, I urge you to play the game with your child and see as to what the child comes up with. But one important piece of information or advice that we would give you is never give the child the solution until he or she figures it out herself. This is absolutely vital. The strategy will be deeply embedded in the child's learning only if the child figures it out. I shared it with you in the context of this webinar, but ideally you should not share it. And it's something that the child should discover, right? Now, the game doesn't stop there. Once the child has figured out that this is the game and this is the strategy, then the child feels very accomplished. Now, don't let the child go away with that. Wait for the last bit. Say that, look, if I change the target to 50, and I change the add-on number between 1 and 5, what will the strategy be? Yeah. So what you're trying to do with this add-on rule is that you are conveying to the child that he or she should play the game with varying rules. So if you're playing a game of cards, you play the game of cards in a particular way, and then go out and then say, okay, I'm playing the same game of cards, but let me change the rule a bit. So one of the things that gets embedded in the child is that rules are not fixed in stone. So they get less hard-coded and they're more open-ended. So whenever they play a game, they look at various ways of varying the game in order to make it more interesting. So they will say, let's play this 2-player number game with 200. Let's play this 2-player number game with 50, with 10. So that gives that much more agility for the mind, which we think is a part of developing thinking abilities. So that's the story of playing games for the middle schooler. And now I'm going to the story for the high schooler parents. Now this is, I've called this the story of struggle. I hope you enjoy it. This is again a story that unfolded between, I'm going to relate it like a father and child dialogue. And this was reported just a few days ago. It is a fairly high school setting. So the parent looks at his or her child and looks at the child and says, "Why are you so tense?" The child responds, "Don't disturb me. Keep away from me. I may be irritated. This Coursera course is troubling me no end. I'm just not able to understand something in the course." The parent responds, "I told you that it was a tough course and is well ahead of your age. Right, didn't I?" The child responds, "But I am interested in that topic. And you didn't stop me, did you? You didn't say I shouldn't do the course." Then the parent keeps quiet. About a couple of hours passed, and the parent hears the bed being struck a few times, very hard, thumping of the bed, of the mattress actually. And the parent rushes to the child and says, "What happened?" The child just responds, "Just go away. This tutor in this Coursera course is making mistakes. What can I do? Why do these courses make mistakes in there? As it is so tough. Now these mistakes make it even more tougher." The parent says, "Just write to the course tutor. If you found a mistake, just write and sort it out." Then the child responds, "I will do that, but I don't understand what is being said, and I have to do a quiz tomorrow. I have to submit it by the end of tomorrow." The same night, the child goes to sleep around 12 midnight, and the parent asks the parent to wake him up at 5:30 a.m. Next morning, the parent is about to wake up the child, and the child is wide awake, working away on the course. The parent asks, "Is everything okay? You just had 5 hours of sleep. You should have slept longer." The child says, "That's okay, but this thing is gnawing me all through the night. I didn't sleep well. I'm struggling. I had to check whether the tutor had responded." Then the parent asked, "Is it sorted out?" The child says, "Yes, more or less." The tutor clarified, "I have understood, and I'm now fully prepared for the quiz." The parent looks at the child and says, in a kind of a wisecrack way, "It looks like there is some link between struggling and learning, isn't there?" And the child very, very rudely responds, "Shut up," and has a frown on the face. Now, I must give you a bit of a background. This child did the ThinQ's Inquiry and Integration in Education course, about which we'll talk about towards the end of this webinar. What is more important as a parent is to witness the struggle and not to intervene or interfere with it. If the child is capable of handling the struggle, then let it be. Through the struggle, the learning happens and the understanding improves. As a parent, you're facilitating thinking in the child, though you are not doing it yourself. The parent in this case didn't know the topic. The parent had to just keep away and say the right things and keep observant of what the child is doing, right? But not intervene and say, "Okay, don't struggle. You can leave it there." As a parent, you're essentially facilitating the child and not doing it yourself. The feeling of the child at the end of this effort is really different. It's bliss. Get your child to actually experience that. It's like giving a glass of water to a very thirsty person or some food to the very hungry. The feeling is totally different. As a parent, you should facilitate, push your child through such struggles. The think answer to whether or not you should promote such struggle is a very big yes. So when you are actually promoting thinking abilities in your child, you should look at facilitating struggle in a careful and a measured manner. We'll talk about that more because I see there are some questions on that from all of you. With that, I have completed my 3 stories that I've called story of experience, story of playing games, and the story of struggle. I'll hand it over to Shireen, who's going to be anchoring the question answer session. Over to Shireen.
Thank you, Desh and Sriram. So, as those of you who filled in the registration forms would know, we asked you to outline and highlight your biggest question in the parenting journey. So what we've done is consolidated those because we got quite a good number of responses. So we've consolidated them into common questions that we've had, and I'd be taking each one of those with one of the speakers. So yeah, this is sort of in line with what you were saying. So a lot of parents have asked that how is it that I get my child to think independently in a lot of situations, right? So how do I involve my child in tasks which enable or enhance thinking? How do I make that an independent activity for them? What would you have to say to that? I think you're on mute, Vish.
Wonder how I got there, but I hope the computer is not shutting me up. Now, first of all, I think we need to get into what is thinking itself. The commonplace use of the term think is to reflect on a particular topic, right? And when a parent uses this very often with the child, the parent raises a question and the child is about to respond, and then the parent says, stop, think and respond. Often what it means is that the parent is asking the child to recall from memory, make the connections from memory, and then present an answer. Now, the think's approach towards thinking is quite different. As Sriram had mentioned, and I had also indicated, thinking has got various elements to it, the thinking processes to it. Now, let's assume two scenarios. One is you have knowledge on a particular area. You have some information which is being presented to you as knowledge. And the second is where you don't have any knowledge or any information. Now, if you have knowledge or information in a particular area, then you should encourage your child to evaluate critically the knowledge, right? Now, how does one do that? Now, in today's world, fortunately, we have WhatsApp. And in WhatsApp, every second post gives you fake news, right? Now, if that a particular piece of information, as soon as you read it, you think it's appropriate for your child, then you share it with your child and ask the child to figure out, as to evaluate as to whether it is genuine or is it fake. Now, how will the child do it? These fake news are essentially claims or statements that are made saying that this is what it is, and these should have a rationale. Now, when you give it to your child, you will recognize clearly that perhaps the rationale of the basis is not very strong, right? So that's why you thought that it could be fake and it could be used for your child to actually examine further. Now, what do children do normally today's children? They rush to the internet. They have some various fact checks websites. They go to the fact check websites and see whether, and they type the string and see whether this string comes up as a fake news or not. Just hold them back. Say, look, you shouldn't be doing that alone. We can do that later, but examine as to what could be the rationale, which could be absolutely wrong. And then you get into examining what is the rationale that the child thinks is very weak in order to arrive at that claim in what we receive as fake news. And then maybe after a day, you could check with the fact check and then compare it with what the child has got. Now, by doing that, you are enabling a thinking process. Now, this will, once you do it right and you indicate that this is something that the child has done well, the child slowly gathers the confidence to be able to do it by himself or herself.
Very interesting. So basically you're saying pause before you act. I think that's like a thread, pretty much everything that you've been saying so far. A good principle for a parent to apply would say, before you respond, pause. Before the child moves to the gadget to look, pause, think, and then act maybe, right? So Sriram, I'd like you to help us with an example from everyday life that would kind of make this easy to understand for parents. Anything that comes to your mind?
Well, a lot of things can be done in the atmosphere of home, where we are all right now. And for instance, kitchen is a wonderful place for us to start getting the child to think in terms of, what will happen if you do this, those kind of questions, or why is something happening and why is something not happening. So one area or one approach could be to get the child to ask as many interesting questions as possible in the kitchen atmosphere. For example, when you put the butter, when you heat the butter, it melts. But when you heat jaggery, it melts. But when you heat something else, it becomes a solid. And can you name 10 things which will become solid? And can we check if they become solid? And 10 things which will become which will be solids before you heat them, and then which will become liquids, kind of things. We can also take up, if the child is of an appropriate age, we can take up something like, say, idli, and then deal with it at some length. We all eat idli, I'm sure. And but what exactly is idli? And how do you define an idli? We don't have to take it to a sort of a length. It can be taken to some length, but very basic questions on how can you, supposing you are blindfolded and I put something in your mouth, can you tell me whether it is idli? Probably yes. Or if something is of a particular shape, does that make it idli? A sort of a oval kind of or a round shape, is that idli? Is white color associated with idli, or can that be of any color? Can you accept that as idli? Can you accept a sweet idli? What about the process through which idli is made? Should that we hear things like fried idlis. So can we say that we will accept only something that is steamed as idli, and we will not accept something which is fried as idli? So you can go on. What will be the ingredients? For example, you have rava idli, you have millets, you have rice, you have urad dal, you have many things. And what about the shape? We talked about the shape, but what about when we talk about the shapes, we talk about the molds in which idli is made. So what about, for example, in urban homes, we make idlis with metal vessels, aluminum or steel. But traditionally in villages, you still find idlis made from steaming batter in jackfruit leaves, stitched jackfruit leaves or stitched leaves of some other tree. Would you call that idli? That is, you can't relate that to the shape of idli. But if you just close your eyes, again, if you are blindfolded, and if you taste a bit of that, you would still call that idli. So what will you go? Again, the point is to engage the child in this kind of a discussion. We don't have to arrive at a concrete definition that, okay, this is idli and nothing else is idli. You don't have to go to that extent, but you can engage the child in a discussion like this.
All right. Okay. I think that's a good example, and also, why the labels that we give things, right? Where do those labels come from, and why? What is the distinctive factor of those labels? That's a great route to take with children in the kitchen or elsewhere in the house. So I'd like to stay with you on this, Sriram. And there are some of our parents have asked that there are times when I have limited knowledge on something that the child has asked me, and also if I want to encourage the child to think, it's good to say that maybe I don't know, or let's do this together, or things like that. But after a point, does that become too much to do with the child? Will my child stop asking me, saying, you're anyway going to tell me to do this, or you're anyway going to tell me not to think? So where do I draw the line without either killing my child's confidence in me as a parent, or with the questions just stopping? So what would you say to that?
Well, again, as we said earlier, there is no blanket solution for this problem. You can't say that this process works right through. Whatever questions child has, follow this. It doesn't happen like that. If the child is, there may be times, it depends on the situation. It depends on how old the child is and how willing the child is to engage with you in finding or in probing further. If the child is doing homework and if the child wants a very specific answer to a question, maybe it makes sense to just give away that answer, if you know that, or refer to a source and give away that answer. But keep that in mind, can you actually build, you can go back to that question and answer, and can you build an interesting question out of that?
Right.
So what, again, let's talk about, say, what's the capital of India? Delhi. All right. Okay. No, you give it to the child because the child is in a hurry to complete homework. But tomorrow, can you pick up that and engage the child in a conversation about, hey, what about should every country have just one capital? Why not have 4 or 5 capitals? Why not have that one capital itself at a place where everyone can access. As all of us know, Delhi is located at, is up north, is not easily accessible for people in the east or in the south. So does it make sense to have, say, Nagpur as capital? What will be the pros and cons of, if you are to construct a capital or design a capital, what will be the elements you will look for? Will you have a harbor? Will you look for a harbor? Will you look for a nice kind of a background, a mountain background? Or what will be guiding you? You can engage in a discussion with the child. Even having given out the answer earlier, that doesn't really diminish the engagement value with the child on something related to the question that the child asked. That's one. Secondly, if you can, this is actually a tactic. If the child asks you a closed-ended question and you have to give out some answer, suppose you say that, look, I'm slightly tied up now, and can I give you that answer to you tomorrow, or can we talk about it tomorrow? And then the child says, okay, agreed. Then the child goes away. Then you look up the answer yourself. You Google for it if you don't know the answer. Then you figure out a way to engage the child. How much value can you derive before the child arrives at the answer on his or her own, or before you give away the answer? There's various tactics possible. But you have to judge the situation for yourself. If the child is in a hurry, if the child is going to be very annoyed, if you are not giving out the answer, better give out the answer. Keep that in mind. There may be opportunities for you to engage with the child on that answer, on very interesting aspects of that answer later. It's up to you to keep that in mind and engage with the child.
An interesting anecdote comes to mind. So my child, who's 7.5 now, was about 3.5 and had just started reading, 3.5, 4 maybe, started to read a little early. So we drive and he reads a signboard and he was very excited about it. He's like, Mama, it says don't drink and drive. What does that mean? And I was driving and I'm like, oh, how do I tell a 4-year-old about drinking and driving? And I said, you know what? Yeah. And I kind of diverted him to see, okay, let's get over this. The next day we're on the same route. He says, you know what? I figured the answer myself. I said, how did he find out about drinking overnight? And then he says, because when you try to drink water while you're driving, you can't see the road, so you shouldn't drink and drive. So the delay actually helped him figure his own answer out and put me out of that spot of trying to explain what drinking and driving is. I would have never come up with that answer by myself. So yeah, I think it always depends on the question and the context. But thank you, Sriram, for that one. So some of our parents have asked us, in fact, a lot of parents have asked us this, that, how do I, so my child kind of moves from one topic to another. How do I get him or her to focus on one thing without them being so pushy about it? Because you've answered a bit of this in the previous one. But I think what we're asking is, how do we get them to stay on to one topic instead of, so how do I get them to go deeper on something that is bothering them or probing, get them to probe deeper versus just moving on to another topic? How do I get them to stay on? So, Dish, any thoughts on that?
You recall,
are on mute again. Sorry?
Did you hear me?
Now we can, yes.
So the story of struggle is clearly an example that can be referred to in the context of this question. But one of the things that we would recognize is that one should not overdo it. So every topic, once you engage with the child, there would come a stage where you cannot push the child beyond a point. You should have the ability to recognize that and park the topic at that stage for that time. And then remember that there is a further exploration on that topic that's possible. And then revisit the topic when the child is ready for that, maybe a few years later or a few months later, right? And you make the connection at that time. One way to do this is actually keep notes that you have taken this topic with the child to a certain extent, and then you know that you should revisit it at a later time. The one other point that needs to be kept in mind is that when the topic is not of interest to the child, at a particular point in time, then one should not pursue with that topic at that time. It does not mean that that topic will not be of interest to the child in the future. We should revisit that topic in the future. Now, if the child is veering off the topic or losing interest quickly, then perhaps it's a timing issue. The assemblage of various information in the child's brain is such that that topic is not of interest at that time. So you should stay clear of the topic for then and then revisit it at a later time. And that's the way we have been recommending that we do it. And we are finding that this approach is actually yielding positive results.
Okay, sure. I think the notes idea is great. I should start doing that myself. It helps to go back to the topics we've missed. Considering the current situation, right, we're all under the lockdown. COVID-19 has put a lot of thoughts and questions in the minds of adults and children alike. A lot of parents have asked, as to how do we use the COVID-19 situation to engage with children? How do we use this situation to develop critical thinking? Sriram, would you like to take that up?
In some sense, this is an excellent opportunity to observe the child and engage with the child at some length. Depending on the child's age, you can come up with situations, questions, which both you and the child can think about. For instance, to a middle schooler, a question like, if the child doesn't come up with the question himself or herself, you can pose this question. Now that everybody is working from home, now should we continue to be like this? Or office is necessary at all? What kind of offices would be necessary? And what kind of offices won't be necessary? Won't you be saving costs if you continue to work from home and if you can keep up the efficiency level at the same, as you would be when you go to office? So what is lost and why were you not doing this earlier? Why are we are doing it now? So why not continue? What is this urge to go back to normalcy? What does that mean? So questions like that. For a smaller child, you need to engage with it. Supposing the child is really small, let's say a primary schooler, you can give the example of supposing an angel were to appear before you and give you sort of some boon about, okay, I can buy you anything that you want during the lockdown period. What are the things that you would buy? Will be appropriate for a primary child. For a high school child, it will be something like, supposing you get 3,000 rupees and no more for a week. How can we survive as a family? What are the essential things? When we say essential goods, that the term is in the sort of in news now, essential goods. Shops that sell essential goods have been opened in many cities. Now, what is essential for us? I discovered a few days ago that the bar with which I clean my vessels, I didn't consider that to be essential. And suddenly I saw that I don't have a liquid to clean the dishes. So that is an essential good for me, not just the food item. So what will you include in essential items for our family? Survival questions. If you have 1,000 rupees, what will you buy? What will you not buy per week or per month? If you have 5,000 rupees, what will you buy? If you have, what would you like to buy but would not be able to buy in this amount? All right. And supposing you have a neighbor who is a disabled person, how will you design facilities, and who is not going to be able to get out? How will you design facilities for the person to be able to live at home? And in emergencies, what will you do? What will you not do? And if you are, for example, caught up at a friend's house and you cannot get out, now what will be how will you manage that situation? Will you be at your friend's place without a murmur, without complaining, or for whatever time it takes for the lockdown to be lifted? There are also moral issues. For example, if the government has allowed in some cities, the food delivery boys to pick up food and drop. Now, that possibly, in your opinion, exposes them to a health hazard if they are coming through a, say, crowded area, because they are going to be in contact with so many people. And right now, some states have banned food delivery. Right. And so in some states, food delivery boys have been known to be infected with COVID-19. So it is legally allowed. But will you order food or won't you order food? And what will you be guided by? What principles will guide you? Supposing the lockdown, supposing they say that, okay, lockdown in the sense there is a complete lockdown. It happened in Chennai. For 4 days, all the shops were shut. Supposing the 4 days were to be, say, 20 days, all the shops are going to be shut. And you need to buy vegetables. What vegetables will you buy, which will last for 20 days or 25 days? And how will you phase them out in terms of cooking? Because all this is actually happening. So will you cook your potatoes first on the first day? You won't, right? Because potatoes last long. So you will keep them for a later day. You would probably cook those vegetables or food items which will get spoiled first, and then phase out the ones which will come later, and probably keep the ones, the root items like potato or etc. Onions towards the end. So these questions will be of interest because they are about your situation in a lockdown condition, and I'm sure they will help you engage with the child. You need to be careful about the child's age and interest.
I think you covered a lot of ground with those examples. Like you went from mathematics to ethical or moral situations, and how a child thinks is going to come to the fore quite a bit through these questions. So thank you for that. We have, people, again, this is an extension of what you mentioned earlier about going in the age of asking Google and Alexa, right? How do you put the plug that child's natural bent to say, okay, you know what, let's just find out on Google, or just let me ask Alexa, it's just easiest to find an answer. You've covered a bit of this. Is there anything you'd like to add, Dish, over here?
Yeah, it's one of the things that we have seen parents who have consulted us is that they're trying to fight the digital battle by saying digital, no digital. Now, right. That's a losing battle in a certain sense. So one of the things that we recommend is that use digital in a smart way. Accept the digital devices as they are going to pervade, if they've not yet pervaded all of society, and figure out as to what parts of the digital platforms can you use gainfully. Now, now that with COVID-19 situation and the spread of the use of online education, the positive sides of actually using digital devices for learning is coming to the fore. And there now the choice, the challenge in front of us is to figure out what to pick, because as of now, there are just so many webinars, there are so many school programs which are on the web, which is available. And one of the things that we would recommend is that when you use digital devices for learning, just make sure that you have a spread and use the device to figure out where your areas of interest are. And within the area of interest, does it facilitate your thinking so that you can engage in the areas of your interest and use thinking abilities in order to deepen them. Now, there are some courses out there which talk about which you would be able to find in your areas of interest. And there would be certain level of facilitation in terms of in terms of developing thinking faculties. But one of the things that you should use screen time, as you put it, is that once you're finished with the screen time, you get on to doing a lot of discussion without the screen being on display. So you use a lot, you engage with the screen, pick up whatever information you need, and then within the family, within the parent and the child, engage in what you learn through the digital device and try and expand that learning. One of the things that's happening with the digital technologies is that children are just jumping from one initiative to another initiative in the context of using digital time. And that is really not what we would recommend. It's something that you need to reflect, pause, consider what you've learned, and then internalize it, agree with it, disagree with it. And that's probably the better way of actually using time constructively.
Right. Yeah, I think that's also worked with younger children. I can see is when you, instead of making it passive consumption, where the child is just sitting and staring and absorbing, an adult sitting with the child and sort of making it more interactive seems to have a better, when you are at it, might as well make better use of the digital screen time that the child is getting. So that's definitely worked for us as a family. Before I take further questions, because we do have some on the chat as well, I'd like to do a time check because of the delays, etc. We're now at 6:13. Those who are watching us live, can I quickly ask you to give us a yes if you'd like this session to continue, or would we do a hard stop at say 6:20 in about 7 minutes or so? Are you okay with us extending by another 15 odd minutes, because we do have a lot of questions that we could address? Can you just quickly comment on the live chat saying yes or no if you have time for extension by about 20 minutes?
As we wait, could we move on to the next question?
Yeah, sure. All right. So there are a lot of questions again around the, so one interesting thing that parents of slightly older children seem to have said is, like my teenage child doesn't maybe listen to me, and, or someone else has asked specifically that why do children stop listening as they grow? Like why is it that, why can't they take things for granted? And how is it that I get my child to understand my struggle? And so, there are things that, why does he not listen to me? Why can he not obey me? What do you think, Sriram, to this? What is a possible answer to a parent like that?
I presume we are talking about teenage children, right? Somebody is complaining.
Yeah. Specifically about teenage children, yes.
Well, I mean, you can't have the cake and eat it too. You can't say that I want my child to be an independent thinker, and at the same time I want my child to listen to me and accept my opinion. Where I presume listen to me implies, accept my opinion. Some parents actually get onto this guilt tripping, as we call it. This is strictly not a question about thinking abilities. In some sense, it is more for psychologists to deal with this, but we will, give out to it. So it's really bad if you are telling your child that if you are sending a signal that if you disagree with me, I am not very happy, I am not pleased, you are making your affection for your child conditional. That itself is not correct. So in these situations, when you're trying to guilt trip the child, when you're trying to say that, you have to agree with me because I have so much more years of experience and you are a youngster, I don't approve of what you are doing, or I disagree with you. And that if you continue to disagree with me, that will have consequences in terms of my, affection, my time, or whatever else. If you are sending out signals like this, the problem is with the parent and not with the child. That's that's how I would look at it. The child has arrived at some inferences or is acting on some sort of conclusions or judgments which he or she has made based on some kind of reasoning. Now, it might be worthwhile to keep your judgment in abeyance and understand what that process is. Why are you doing this? Can you give me some reason as to why you are doing this? I'm just trying to understand you. I'm not trying to pronounce a judgment on whether it is right or wrong, but I'm just trying to understand the reason why you are doing this or not doing this. That might actually unravel. Again, the point is to increase the engagement time on a topic where there is a difficulty, but the top priority should be to maintain the healthy parent-child relationship that comes on the top of everything. So everything else is subservient to that. So if anything is going to affect that, I think you should avoid doing that. And the child has a mind of his own or her own, and has a certain reasoning. You might find fault with it. Now, one thing which may make sense is to actually see if that rationale which the child has for his or her decision, is smooth and is a good one, is correct one. I don't agree or disagree with you, but there is a problem in your reasoning, without pronouncing a value judgment on that. So if you can actually point to something like that in a very gentle way, the child may still not agree with you, but may figure out a way to reconcile the thought process in arriving at certain decisions. But guilt tripping is a certain absolute no, and it is the parent who needs to look at himself or herself about why I'm getting angry when my child disagrees. There is the famous quote about Churchill when Churchill says, I'm all fine for democracy and disagreements as long as you all finally agree with me. That's what he apparently told his cabinet minister. That should definitely not be a stance for a parent.
I'll quickly take one or two questions from that chat. We'll then wrap up in another 10 to 12 minutes. 30 is what we're looking at. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
So, all right. Okay, so we have someone asking that, especially in the single child scenario, right? How do I make my child, not because they are the center of focus at the end, because it's just the one child and, parents' attention, and if there are grandparents in the family, how do I ensure that the child is independent and not really grows up independently? Let me just rephrase that, and plays independently, specifically the parent asks, without becoming the center of our attention. Anything that you have on that one? Dish, do you want to go?
Yeah. Just see it a little differently. That is to say that every child, as he or she grows up, is getting various inputs from various sources from all around. Now, the child absorbs information, absorbs inputs like a sponge. Right? Now, what is important to recognize is what the nature of those inputs are, and whether it is leading the child to discover his or her interest areas, right? Now, if the processes around the child are such that, whether it's grandparents or it's a joint family system that you live in, are not resulting in any clear areas of interest being identified in the child, then alone you need to figure out as to what needs to be done in order to expose the child to other audiences in order for the child to pick up additional new strands of information or interests. Now, how do you figure this out? You have to figure that out again using thinking abilities to figure out, being very observant in terms of figuring out as to whether, yes, am I sensing some sense of interest in the child in this topic or that topic, right? Now, I would urge, at least from the limited experiences that we have seen around us, we wouldn't urge that you say that if the child is receiving inputs from all around, then the child is not independent. But what is important is that the child is not following instructions from all around. The child receives information from all around and then decides for himself or herself as to what should be done. Now, that's something that you can inculcate in the child. And again, that is done through conveying to the child that what you're hearing from various sources are not instructions for you to obey. They are information for you to examine and to see as to whether this is pertaining to your area of interest, or if it's not, then you examine it to say it's not your area of interest, and then slowly build the capacity of the thinking capacity of the child in order to be able to flourish in the societal system that he or she lives within. I hope that helps.
Can I add to what Dish said on the very specific single child issue? Just one point to be noted is that people tend to, particularly with single child families, the parents or grandparents or other relatives tend to admire the children's acts, admire the children's so-called achievements, admire the children's questions, and at some point of time that becomes a trap that, the child asks a very interesting question and the parent freezes in admiration. And over a period of time, the child realizes that he or she is being admired for some acts or for some skills or questions, and then gives that dose which will keep the parent in an admiring kind of, frozen in an admiration condition. And then the child goes and does whatever she or he wants to do. So it becomes a manipulative tool for children. So don't get into this trap of admiration. If you are, then take a look at that. It may be once in a while, it may be okay to say an encouraging word or two to the child, but admiring the child for every act of his or hers is not going to help the child.
Okay, thank you, Sriram and Deesh, for that one. So yeah, Deesh, so I would, we have some parents who are saying they could do a second session on this. I'd like you to conclude by, summarizing what we've discussed so far for those who joined late, to take away what we talked about, and also address how this can be inculcated in adults. So for us to be able to teach children to think, we should also be following that path of thinking versus just finding information out. So how can we do that? And then if you could summarize the whole discussion for us, it would be great, Deesh. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. As we been talking about now, this session was focused on enhancing thinking ability through parenting. So the focus of our attention was on the child. Now, but you're absolutely right that if the parent is not aware that thinking abilities are important and is not aware that perhaps the current educational system that all of us have to reckon with, particularly in India, does not pay enough attention to thinking abilities, then you wouldn't recognize that this is something that you as a parent would need to do. Now, leaving that aside, should the parent, first of all, the parent should recognize that there is a need to build the capacity, thinking capacity of the child, in addition to what is being done in the schools. Now, the parent could be a parent who wants to have just an appreciation of the importance of thinking abilities, or can be an inquirer, a critical thinker himself or herself. Now, obviously, if the parent is open and is interested into starting the process of his or her own learning in terms of learning to become an inquirer, a critical thinker, that's perfect for the child, because the child and the parent could inquire and critically evaluate and grow together in a very meaningful and a constructive manner. But that's not absolutely necessary. But an appreciation of the importance of thinking abilities is vital. Yeah. Now, we feel that the school education, the way these syllabuses are structured, the way the curriculums are structured, is so heavily loaded in terms of pushing information and calling that information knowledge into the child's brain, that whatever comes in as thinking abilities get sidestepped. It's not as to say that there is no thinking abilities, there is very limited, and it's often lost in the body of knowledge and information that is being thrust at the child. And therefore, it's very important to appreciate that an effort is required. Now, recognizing this is when about 5 years ago that Sriram and I chose to actually engage with the ThinQ, which was at that time in 2015, they had started this course called Inquiry and Integration in Education. And both of us enrolled in the course because we had identified that this was a gap, and we were trying to do something, as Sriram mentioned, in an unstructured way. And then we did the course, and then we realized that the same thing that we were trying to do can be done in a structured and a systematic manner, which is what this 5-month course, IIE, what we call Inquiry and Integration in Education, offers. Both Sriram and I, after having done the course 5 years ago, have joined ThinQ, and we are very happily trying to contribute to engage with as a ThinQ resource in a variety of forums. Now, this 5-month course that we have starts in mid-May. We are asking you to consider this course. Many of us as parents have benefited greatly. We'd like to share the same with you. This is an online course, starts in May and ends in mid-October. It's a very personalized course, even though it's online. It's focused on the learner. It tries to facilitate the learner. There are what we call learning triggers, which are like lesson plans, but they trigger you to think. They trigger you to actually question and ask you to question what you've been through and what you assume are pieces of givens or assumptions that you live in or live with. And then it covers a lot of what we have already covered, but much, much more. We gave you some examples of, knowing. We gave you some stories on mathematical, on using the game, as well as we talked about, struggle stories. These are all something that we weave into the course which is done over a period of 5 years. Now, 5 months, sorry. Please note that this course is not only for parents. It's got an eclectic mix of participants. You have teachers, you have educators, you have students, you have also parents. If some of you join together as a group, we may like to form a subgroup of parents to explore how thinking abilities can be facilitated amongst parents or amongst the parents' children. This is something that we can explore further, but we need a good number of parents to sign up in order to do that. I'd like to add that this is ThinQ is a purely voluntary initiative, but any voluntary initiative also needs funds to administer the course, and therefore we have a fee. But in case you have certain constraints and you would like us to waive the fee or reduce the fee, please feel free to write to us and tell us that you would like to do the course, but you have some constraints at your end. It's very important for us that you actually benefit from doing the course and use this course gainfully to build in or enhance thinking abilities in your respective parenting styles. Your contexts are different. You as a parent are different. You are the best judge as to how you use the thinking abilities in your context and transform yourself to becoming what I call within quotes, creative parents. Now, there's one issue. We apologize. We are beaming this webinar fairly late in the day. We are very close to closing the course timeline for applying for the course. It's actually a couple of days ahead. By day after, we are hoping to close the application process. However, if you're really interested, we would like you to visit our website, which is www.think.education/IIE. If you have any questions about the course, do drop us an email and share your mobile number. One of us from the ThinQ team will call you. If you need any clarifications, you need any additional information, we'll call you, we'll speak to you, and based on the information you have at the website and based on the clarifications we provide over the phone, we will, you can decide as to whether or not you would like to join the course. I must add, and before I conclude the IIE piece, that some of the students who have benefited quite a bit have been last minute entrants into the course. So don't feel really bad that we have actually got this webinar to you fairly late in the day, but it is fairly late in the day. We are 2 days short of closing. Now, with that little bit on the IIE course that we are offering, I'd like to quickly sum up what we said. We started off by saying, look, we are not experts. We are not parenting gurus. We are not psychologists. We are not counselors. We are parents who have an extraordinary focus on thinking abilities. We have implemented it not only with our own children, but we've also advised other parents, and we find that there is value in building thinking abilities in parenting, and that's why we are here. My colleague Sriram spoke about 3 aspects about questioning, the importance of questioning, structured in a systematic way, about knowing, and also about, he brought in the Feynman example, and also about learning in general. And then I spoke about, I gave you 3 stories, one for the high school parent, one for the middle school parent, and then for the primary school parent. And remember, one of the things I emphasized was that wonder, imagination, discovery are the fundamentals, right? Don't forget that ever. Don't make it a very mechanical view of using tools. That's not going to get you very far. You got to live in a world without labels, without information. You got to live with the world with information, and before the information gets transferred from to knowledge, and then you work within the knowledge domain, and then have the ability to inquire as well as to critically evaluate the knowledge that you've got. Then for the middle schoolers, we did this simple game, which essentially gave you an idea as to how to build mental agility with numbers, which will lead you on to doing mathematical inquiry, as well as getting on to mathematical theory building as you move ahead in the course of developing your thinking abilities further. And then lastly, we gave you the value of struggle. This is something that is paramount. Do not discount it. Discomfort and struggle are a very nature of, are very intrinsic to learning, and we believe that that needs to be carefully facilitated, both in yourself as well as in your parents. And lastly, we had a range of questions. Thank you very much for all the questions that you asked. Very nice. We are very happy with your engagement in these questions. We hope we've tried to answered some of them, or at least responded in a manner that benefited you. But if you have any further questions, we strongly suggest that you write to us at contact us at think.education. If we have enough questions, then we will compile answers to the questions. We'll consolidate the response and we'll put it up on our website. The video of this session is also being recorded and will be available to you for future learning. Thank you very much to all of you for being a part of this webinar. We apologize for the delay in starting. I'd also, before ending, I'd like to thank my colleagues, Sriram and Shireen, for anchoring the Q&A, and to myself for anchoring a session, and also a lot of people from the Think team who have worked backstage in making this happen. Thank you very much. And last but not the least, thanks to all the participants who put up with us and who were willing to engage with us, even though we concluded 35 minutes past the time. Thank you very much. Bye for now.